Hello friends, welcome to the channel IT Simplified. What is the right series of virtual machine I should be deploying for my application and database in cloud? I see a lot of organizations struggling with this and rightly so because there are so many options to choose from. So I thought maybe I will do a quick video on this. Now I will divide this into two categories of customers. Category 1 which already have their private data center and they have their application and databases deployed. And then there is a customer 2 which don't have any reference point. They are starting up fresh and they want to deploy this in cloud on virtual machines. So let's start with customer 1. Now, typically, when we are trying to deploy resources in our own private data center, we go with the worst case scenario. But in cloud, we deploy resources keeping in mind the best case scenario. What I mean by that is, say, for example, I want to deploy this in my own data center. And today, the requirement for my application is gig of RAM, one CPU, and 1 gig of storage. But I will buy a server hoping that my demand will increase and I'll deploy maybe with the 3 CPUs, 3 gig of RAM and 3 gig of storage. That is what I mean by worst case scenario. But in cloud, as you know that you're paying for what kind of resources you're using and what series of virtual machine you're using. So I don't want to over provision because I can always bump it up to next level just right click of a button. That is what I mean by best case scenario in cloud. But let's go back to the scenario number 1, in which the customer already have their resources in their data center. I highly recommend that you use some sort of assessment tool so that you can run against your application and databases and let it run for at least a week or two because during this duration, this tool will have enough time so that it can understand what are the highs and lows of your application. Based on that, it will make intelligent decision what should be the right size or right node that you should be deploying in Azure. There are a lot of third-party options available. If you want to use Microsoft Service, you can go and use Azure Migrate Server Assessment. And that is for your customer which is already have resources on-prem. But what happens for customer who don't have any reference point and they want to deploy these resources in cloud? It is a bit tricky. You can go and read through the documentation for Microsoft because there are different kind of virtual machines there. Or you can also go through what are the minimum requirements that your application requires from your CPU, RAM, and storage. Again, there are so many options to choose from. But for example, if you just want to test the water and you want to just see how Azure is going to behave, you can maybe use an E-series virtual machine. Now, these machines offer the lowest compute but are good for test and dev purposes because they have the lowest cost in terms of compute. Now, if you require a little bit more compute power, and if you have a smaller database, maybe you can use V-series or bustable VMs. But my favorite and generally what I see in the marketplace are the D-series virtual machine, which are good for different kind of workloads, generally generalized workload, whether you're running web services, web application, relational databases, because this offers you both AMD as well as Intel chipset. The A series virtual machine will have an AMD EPYC chipset, and the D series virtual machine will have Intel Xeon processor. And you can always move up and down within the series too in case your application is not big. Now, if you require maybe a compute node which requires the higher database or bigger database like SAP HANA, you can go with M series virtual machine because this offer on a single VM you can have a 4 terabyte of RAM and up to 128 virtual CPU on a single VM. Now, if your requirement is that you want to do maybe weather simulation or financial analytics job, you can go with H series or high compute series workload by deploying these within the H series virtual machine. What happens in case you are required to do the gaming, maybe animation, rendering work? For that, you can use N-series virtual machine, which offers dedicated GPU, typically NVIDIA GeForce card. But it is not unusual, even if you have deployed these resources, to move the scale up and down till you know that this is going to be the right series of virtual machine. And you can use maybe a lot of telemetry which is provided by Microsoft for you free of cost, like CPU consumption, IOPS, or maybe you can use Azure Advisor tool give you insight into what you should be using for that specific kind of application or your database. And on top of that, you can use Some cost-saving benefits, for example, you can go and use reserve instances for 1 year or 3 year term. And you can also apply Azure hybrid benefit if you have on-prem Windows Server licensing, and you can bring those licensing and attach that to your workloads running in Azure. But as I said that, depending upon what scenario you're coming from, you can use different options available, whether you're in category 1 or category 2. But again, even after you have done all your work and all your prep work, it is not uncommon to change the series of virtual machine after you have moved their workloads in the cloud. Hopefully, this gives you an idea about what series of virtual machine you should be choosing in Azure. Thanks for watching.